Rajni Sharma, a bright young bride from Delhi, thought she had found her happily ever after with Canadian businessman Daniel McCarthy, but within a year, their picture-perfect marriage would descend into a nightmare, ending with her lifeless body hidden in a locked basement and a community reeling. From the shocking truth, Rajni Sharma had always been someone who believed in destiny. Growing up in Delhi, she had dreamed of a life filled with adventure and love, imagining herself traveling the world with someone who would cherish her. Her family, while traditional, supported her ambitions. They knew Rajni wasn't the kind to settle for a quiet, predictable life. She worked at a small marketing firm where she often met clients from different parts of the world. It was there, during a business dinner, that she first met Daniel McCarthy, a Canadian businessman visiting India to discuss a potential partnership with her company. Daniel stood out immediately. He was tall, with a gentle smile and a way of speaking that seemed calm and reassuring. Unlike others, he didn't rush through conversations or look at his phone while she spoke. He seemed genuinely interested in her life, asking questions about her culture, her city, and her dreams. Rajni was flattered by his attention, and soon their meetings became more frequent. What started as professional courtesy quickly turned into late-night phone calls, long walks in the city, and promises whispered over coffee. Within 3 months, Daniel proposed. It felt fast, but the idea of living in another country, building a new life, and being with someone who seemed so devoted was tempting. Her family was hesitant at first, concerned about her moving so far away with someone they barely knew, but Daniel charmed them during his visits, speaking respectfully and assuring them that Rajni would be treated like a queen. The wedding was a beautiful blend of traditions, with vibrant Indian colors and Daniel's small group of Canadian friends standing awkwardly but smiling during the ceremonies. The move to Canada was overwhelming but exciting. Rajni marveled at the snow-covered streets, the quiet neighborhoods, and the crisp, cold air that stung her cheeks. Their new home was a modest two-story house in a peaceful suburb of Ontario, with neatly trimmed lawns and friendly neighbors who waved from their driveways. Daniel seemed eager to help her adjust, introducing her to the local market, showing her how to drive on icy roads, and teaching her Canadian customs. But as the days turned into weeks, Rajni noticed subtle changes in Daniel. He began commenting on her clothing choices, suggesting she wear more subdued colors instead of the bright saris and dresses she loved. He asked her to limit her calls to family, saying that constant communication with them was making it harder for her to settle in. At first, she thought it was just his way of trying to help her adapt, but soon it began to feel like control. Still, Rajni pushed aside her unease. She told herself every marriage had adjustments. When they were out together, Daniel still smiled and spoke kindly to her, and she wanted to hold onto the image of the man who had swept her off her feet in Delhi. She didn't know that beneath the surface of their perfect love story, shadows were already forming, and that the charming man she had trusted her life with was not the man she thought she knew. The first few months in Canada passed in a blur, but the small moments of unease began to grow into patterns Rajni could no longer ignore. Daniel's controlling nature, which she had brushed off as protectiveness, became a constant presence in her daily life. It started with small things, comments about how she should spend less time outside because winter can be dangerous, or subtle reminders that she should wait for him before making any big decisions. She noticed that whenever she mentioned wanting to take a part-time job or enroll in a course, his mood would shift. He would tell her she didn't need to work, that he could provide everything she needed, and that she should focus on being a good wife. One thing that puzzled her from the beginning was the basement. From the day she arrived, Daniel had made it clear that the door to the basement was always to remain locked. He told her it was just a storage space for old furniture, tools, and things that would only be in the way. He even joked that it was messy enough to be dangerous, but his tone was never light. When the subject came up, his eyes would harden, and he would quickly change the topic. On more than one occasion, she found herself standing near the basement door, wondering why it needed a heavy padlock if it was just for storage. As autumn set in, Rajni's world became smaller. She rarely left the house alone. Daniel insisted on driving her to the grocery store and back, often rushing her through the aisles. She noticed how his warmth in public contrasted sharply with his coldness at home. If she disagreed with him, his voice would grow sharp, and sometimes he would slam a door or go silent for hours. It was during one of those silences that she began noticing other strange details, like how he would sometimes carry large, heavy bags down to the basement late at night, or how the faint smell of bleach would linger in the air the next morning. Her friends in India picked up on her increasingly quiet tone during calls. They asked if she was okay, but she always found a way to reassure them, afraid of worrying her family or starting an argument with Daniel if he overheard. She began wearing long sleeves even indoors, hiding faint bruises on her arms. She told herself they were from bumping into counters or slipping on icy steps, but deep down she knew they weren't accidents. The sense of isolation deepened with each passing week. The neighborhood was friendly, but she didn't feel free to form connections. Daniel would tell her the neighbors were nosy, that they didn't need to be involved in their lives. It was a lonely existence, and the house, once full of new possibilities, began to feel like a cage. Rajni tried to convince herself that she could make it work, that every marriage had challenges, but a gnawing fear had taken root inside her. She couldn't shake the feeling that the basement and whatever Daniel was hiding there was somehow connected to the darkness she now saw in him, and she had no idea just how close she was to uncovering the truth. The first real snow of the season had just fallen when Rajni's world went completely silent. She had been keeping a low profile for weeks, moving carefully through her days, trying not to trigger Daniel's temper. But on one cold November evening, she vanished from everyone's radar. Calls to her phone went unanswered, messages sat unread. The friends in India who had grown increasingly worried noticed the sudden gap in her online presence. Rajni had always shared small glimpses of her life, pictures of meals, short videos of the snowfall, a quick selfie in her favorite bright sweater. Now there was nothing. When her childhood friend Anita tried calling her multiple times in a row, Daniel eventually picked up. His tone was casual, almost bored, as he explained that Rajni had gone to Vancouver to visit a cousin. He claimed she had left her phone at home because she wanted to disconnect for a while, but the explanation felt hollow. Anita knew Rajni had no relatives in Vancouver, at least none she had ever mentioned. Still, Daniel ended the call before she could press further, saying he was busy with work. In the days that followed, subtle signs suggested something was wrong. One neighbor, an elderly woman who often sat by her front window, noticed that Daniel's car had been parked at odd hours and that he had been hauling large black bags into the garage late at night. Another neighbor recalled hearing a series of heavy thuds coming from the McCarthy basement on the same night Rajni supposedly left for Vancouver. It was followed by the sound of running water and then silence. What truly set off alarm bells was the smell. A pungent chemical odor began seeping from the garage, strong enough to make passers-by wrinkle their noses. At first, people assumed Daniel was working on some kind of home renovation, but the odor grew stronger over the week. The same elderly neighbor who had noticed his strange comings and goings finally decided to approach him about it. When she knocked, Daniel opened the door only a crack and told her he was cleaning out old paint supplies and that there was nothing to worry about. His tone was curt, and his eyes darted nervously toward the driveway, as if making sure no one else was listening. Meanwhile, Anita, still unsettled by their earlier conversation, tried contacting Rajni through mutual friends. No one had heard from her. Even Rajni's family in Delhi had been told by Daniel that she was traveling, though he avoided giving any details. As more days passed, the uneasy feeling spread among the small community. It wasn't like Rajni to disappear without a word, and the vague explanations didn't add up. Finally, the elderly neighbor decided she could no longer ignore her instincts. She called the local police and reported her concerns: the strange smells, the late night noises, and the sudden disappearance of the young woman who had once smiled and waved from the front porch. It was a small act, but it would set in motion a chain of events that would uncover the horrifying truth buried beneath the McCarthy home. When the police arrived at the McCarthy home, The air was sharp with the chemical odor the neighbor had described. Daniel greeted them with a practiced calm, leaning against the doorway as if their presence was nothing more than an inconvenience. He was dressed neatly, his hair combed, and he spoke politely, offering to make coffee while they talked. He told them the same story he had given to Rajni's friends and family, that she was away visiting relatives in Vancouver and would be back soon. The officers listened but pressed for details. Who were these relatives? What was their address? Could they call her to confirm? Daniel hesitated, fumbling over his answers, and then claimed she didn't have her phone with her. It was during this awkward exchange that one officer asked about the locked basement door. Daniel's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, his jaw tightening. He said it was just storage, messy and unsafe, and that there was no reason for them to go down there. The officers explained that they had received reports of strange noises, late night activity, and unusual smells coming from the house. Daniel's composure faltered further. He offered to show them the garage instead, pointing out tools and boxes of old clothes, but they were insistent. When he finally refused outright to let them into the basement, the officers contacted their station for a warrant. The tension in the air thickened when the warrant arrived. Daniel stood rigid as the officers cut through the heavy padlock and slowly pulled the door open. A stale, cold draught spilled out, carrying with it the same acrid chemical scent that had been leaking into the neighborhood. The narrow wooden staircase creaked under their boots as they descended into the dimly lit basement. The space was cluttered with dusty furniture, old paint cans, and stacks of cardboard boxes, but it was the far corner that caught their attention. There, partially hidden under a tarp, was a large wooden box roughly the size of a small coffin. The wood was hastily nailed together, with uneven planks and streaks of something dark along the edges. One officer crouched down and noticed the faint outline of a blanket peeking from between the boards. They pried the box open slowly, the nails screeching against the wood. Inside was Rajni's body, wrapped tightly in the blanket. Her face was pale, her hair matted, and her skin bore the marks of blunt force trauma. Lying next to her was a folded piece of paper, smeared with smudged ink, as though written through tears. The note read only a few chilling words about her, not listening, and forcing his hand. The officers stood in grim silence before moving to arrest Daniel. His face was drained of color, his earlier confidence gone. He didn't fight back, only muttered under his breath as they led him upstairs. The house, once a place of supposed love and safety, now felt like a silent tomb, holding the dark truth that had been hidden just a few feet beneath the surface. The news of Rajni's murder spread quickly through the quiet Ontario neighborhood, shaking residents who had once waved at the couple without a second thought. Media vans lined the street, their cameras focused on the modest Toos, Tory house now sealed off with police tape. As investigators dug deeper into Daniel's past, the image of the quiet, polite man began to unravel. What they discovered was a history marked by violence, carefully hidden behind a facade of charm. In his 20s, Daniel had been arrested twice for assaulting former girlfriends. Both cases had ended without convictions. One woman had dropped the charges under pressure, and the other case was dismissed due to insufficient evidence. There were also restraining orders filed by women in different provinces, each describing a pattern of controlling behavior that escalated into physical abuse. None of this had appeared in the background checks Rajni's family conducted before the marriage. His records had been partially expunged, leaving no obvious red flags. The forensic evidence from the basement was overwhelming. Blood traces were found on the wooden floor, despite Daniel's attempts to scrub the scene with bleach. The blanket Rajni was wrapped in boar fibers matching the living room couch, and the note found beside her was confirmed to be in Daniel's handwriting. Investigators also discovered that in the weeks before her death, Rajni had been researching divorce procedures for immigrants and had quietly emailed a women's shelter for advice. These findings painted a picture of a woman preparing to leave and a man unwilling to let her go. The trial began 6 months later, drawing intense media attention. The prosecution argued that Daniel's actions were premeditated, citing the locked basement, his history of abuse, and his immediate attempts to cover up the crime. They brought in witnesses, former partners who testified about his temper, the neighbors who had heard the noises, and the friend from India who had received the suspicious phone call. Each testimony chipped away at the mild-mannered persona Daniel had maintained for years. The defense tried to portray the incident as a moment of uncontrolled anger, claiming Daniel had snapped during a heated argument. They argued that it was not planned, but the jury was unmoved. Photographs of the basement, the bruises on Rajni's body, and the haunting note were impossible to ignore. When the verdict was read, the courtroom was silent. Daniel was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Rajni's family, who had traveled from Delhi, sat with tears streaming down their faces. They had entrusted their daughter's life to a man they believed would protect her, only to have her end up buried in the shadows of her own home. In the weeks after the trial, the community held a memorial for Rajni in the local park. Neighbors who had once kept their distance came forward to share stories of her kindness and smile. The case became a sobering reminder of how easily danger can hide in plain sight, and how love, when placed in the wrong hands, can become a weapon.